I bet. I bet. Well, and from my experience, if I had to guess what fuels you to keep that schedule, and this is something that I don't think people who obviously they don't know you, don't get to spend time around you realize, is how much, one, you love the sport, and two, how much you really appreciate the athletes. I think because you ask the hard questions, which sometimes stirs controversy, which is your job, sometimes people think that you're more into clicks and stirring up controversy when in fact it's really it's your your love for the sport and the athletes, and I've seen that firsthand.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I think sometimes there's a misconception, like, oh, you're trying to stir the pot or you're trying to instigate. I just call that good journalism. I just call that asking pertinent questions. For a very long time, and the sport is still evolving in front of our eyes, but for a very long time, the journalism that we'd get out of MMA, and there were some guys, on the front lines for many years. I think of Sherdog and all the people that worked there, and Full Contact Fighter and things like that. But at times, you'd go to events and people are wearing, the T-shirt of their favorite fighter, and they're asking softball questions, they're kissing the fighters' butts and things like that. And that's just never been my style. And it's because I have the utmost respect for the fighters as being professional athletes that I wanted to go in there and say, okay, what are the questions that people need answers to? What do they want to know? And so I went in there as kind of, half my brain thinking like a professional, half my brain thinking like a fan, just because I have the opportunity, the privilege to talk to Brian Stan after he beat, George Santiago at UFC 130. So I can ask you what it felt like when you were in the middle of the cage, hearing everyone chant USA, USA, just for an example. So I feel like there's a duty there that I have to actually go out and ask the best questions. And there are a lot of times where I feel like, I didn't ask that follow-up. I didn't do a good job with that question. And I'm kicking myself, on my way home or at the hotel. So, I've never viewed it as instigating. I've never viewed it as trying to stir the pot or trying to be an a-hole or too negative. As Dana White said to me, I'm just trying to do my job, and I'm trying to do it the best as possible, and I'm trying to get answers for the great fans of this sport.
Well, and I agree with it. I think that if we're going to, like, we say we're mainstream, but there's still a lot further we could go. We all know that, especially those of us who work in the industry. And I think in order to get there, we have to have journalists asking those questions, not just of the fighters, but also of the executives running promotions. We've got to be able to be accountable and voice our opinions. And, hey, people are going to disagree, and that's fine, right? But, hey, we're still going to stand on our opinions and our reasoning behind it. If we try to control all that, that looks amateurish. That's not mainstream.
Yeah, and one thing I've had these conversations with promoters and managers and fighters in the past, and I've told them, like, it's not personal to me. My job is personal. I want to do the best as possible, but I don't have a vendetta against you. If you want to wear rose-colored glasses and say that, oh, you're too positive about these guys and you're too negative about us, and vice versa, I mean, you could do that, but I try to pride myself on being as unbiased and neutral as possible, and sometimes the coverage is going to be negative because negative things are happening, and sometimes it's going to be overly positive. It's funny, I was talking to someone recently, and they were like, oh, you were too negative about this, one UFC card or whatever, and then I said, look, well, I didn't hear from you when I was saying that, UFC 202 was the greatest card of all time, or that UFC 199 on paper was, maybe the most fun card, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I don't hear from you guys when it's positive, when we're glowing about almost every card, when I'm saying the CM Punk experiment was a good thing and all that. But you say one thing, it's almost like looking at your Twitter. You have 99 great things said to you or tweeted at you. You're like, oh, yeah, big deal. One bad thing, and you'll harp on that forever. And that's kind of human nature. But I hope that people realize that as journalists, we're just trying, at least for me and my team, we're just trying to do our job. And sometimes it's going to be a little negative, sometimes it's going to be a little positive. But I do believe that at the end of the day, we're as fair as possible.
Yeah, judge the whole body of work. It's that's the nature of social media and fans these days. It's so easy to snipe and just send out 140 characters based on a flash second opinion on something. GSP, obviously, he's in a contract dispute. Ultimately, we know the UFC would love to get him back and get him to fight if they can make it happen. How important do you think this is to the UFC right now? How important is GSP's return? Do you see it as a really high priority, or do you think that they are okay with Ronda and Conor basically driving the show here?
There are a lot of layers to this GSP story, and one thought that keeps coming up is, Dana White has said in multiple interviews, and I know part of that is just, promoter talk and whatnot, but he has said that he doesn't believe that GSP wants to fight. I think GSP has laid it out pretty clearly that he wants to fight. And they're claiming he has a contract. He's claiming that they're in breach, and the contract has, pretty much been null and void. So if they think he doesn't want to fight and there's no use for him, why don't you just let him go? Why don't you just let him go test the market, get a deal, and fight? Now, of course, we all know that they don't want him to go sign with Bellator or anyone else because he is a hot commodity. I think if, let's say, a Bellator signed GSP, I think he can go to the Bell Center in Montreal, the Air Canada Center in Toronto, and fill up that place, sell it out in minutes. He's that big of a star, and I think people, based on how they're reacting to this story, still very much care about him. He said something interesting that the new owners told him that they'd have to spend a lot of money reintroducing him to the public upon his return, and I think that's crazy. I mean, he last fought 3 years ago. It wasn't that long ago. People still remember who arguably the greatest of all time is. Another interesting element to all this is, GSP is represented by CAA. And now we know that the new owners of the UFC is WME IMG, and if you know the history of these agencies, they've had a rocky past for many years, and I wonder if that has anything to do with it. So, like I said, there are many layers. I think it would be pretty much an unprecedented stretch for the UFC if they could do 205 with the card that they have, 206 with GSP plus the DC title fight, and then 207 with the return of Ronda. I mean, I can't think of a better stretch than that. And I truly feel for the Canadian fans because right now I think that 206 card is a little thin. I also feel for DC, who gets pay-per-view points and would definitely, stand to gain a lot from GSP being on the card. So, I hope it gets solved one way or another. And I think GSP did a good job of not slamming that door, burning any bridges. So we'll see. But I think that the UFC could use a GSP.
I'll tell you, GSP always handles these situations right. I used the word in the previous segment, class. I mean, he really, in my opinion, he did it the best with class the entire time. And you kind of hinted towards my next question is, do you think the timing, had GSP really been this serious about returning before the sale, 3 months before the sale, where there was more money to be spent, but now where they're really looking to cut cost, obviously, because they paid such a hefty price to get this company, do you think his price tag is maybe what's causing them to delay this?
It is possible. I mean, clearly they're at odds over the price tag. And by the way, great point on the class aspect of GSP. I mean, if you recall, back in the day, showing up to press conferences wearing a suit was an anomaly, and he was one of the first to do that. He would show up to these pre-fight press conferences wearing a suit while everyone else was wearing, flip-flops and Affliction T-shirts. So he was really a pioneer in that.
He got made fun of for doing that. Yeah, Get made fun of for doing that. I remember back then. I remember Brandon Vera saying, "What are we dressing up for these for all of a sudden when I wore a suit?"
Yeah, it's great. And now look at everyone wearing these nice suits, which I think is great for the sport, by the way. So yes, to answer your question, I mean, I think the UFC pulled out all the stops for UFC 200. I don't know in this day and age if the new owners, after paying $4 billion, are breaking the bank to get a Brock Lesnar for essentially one night only. A lot changed after that, and GSP said in that interview with me yesterday on the MMA Hour that, with Lorenzo, he was at the goal line, and they had a deal, and then the new owners come in, and they say that deal is no longer in play, and we're going to talk about a new deal. What's interesting to me is Chris Weidman told me last week that in order to get his deal done for 205 and beyond, his new contract, he had to go to Las Vegas and meet with Lorenzo Fertitta. Fertitta kind of served as this mediator, which is kind of mind-blowing in the sense that he just sold the company. Why is he still involved in deals? But if that happened, and we know he still has a very good relationship with Dana White, why couldn't the same be done with GSP? That's another weird aspect to all of this. And like I said, I mean, the UFC, from what I'm told, laying off around 60 to 80 employees today. There's a reason for that. You talk about cost cutting and duplicate jobs and things like that. So yeah, anyone who thought that WME IMG was going to pay $4 billion, keep it all the same, and just kind of go on their merry way, you were fooling yourselves. So A, they want to try to bring more revenue in. They're going to try to do things strategically to start getting in the black, and B, they have a lot of their own people that they want to put in, and unfortunately, that's just the nature of business acquisitions, as you know.
Now, I want to turn the table. So I want to talk a little bit about MMAfighting.com, which is, one of your, outside of your family, obviously, one of your greatest passions. I mean, it's a website. It's my first choice. It's the first website I go to for MMA news. I'm not just saying that because you're on the line. I've told you this personally before. what's kind of next? What could we see? If I don't want you spilling any secrets, but what could we expect next in terms of access, in terms of video content? I mean, I will say this. MMA fans are some of the biggest consumers of that, in my opinion. I think they're very loyal, and they love those insider videos. Is there anything we could expect that's kind of next generation, next level for MMAfighting.com?
Wow, look at Brian with the hard-hitting questions, trying to get me to reveal my scoops. I like it.
I don't want you to reveal your scoop. I really don't. If you can't, you can't.
I appreciate
just want
the
to know if
question.
there's something to get excited about.
Well, look, I am biased in this regard. I really feel like we have a dream team. And what I love so much about this team is that we all do something very different. They're not. Of course, we can all do certain things the same, but I feel like we all kind of have our roles. Like I'm sort of the video guy, and I do the shows and the interviews at the events. I think Mark Ramundi is a tremendous investigative reporter, and I think he's actually made commissions sort of up their game as far as weight cutting, and just the reporting that he's done this year has been stellar. Sean Al-Shadi is one of the best writers, not just in MMA, but in sports in general, in my opinion. Chuck Mindenhall as well, one of the greatest columnists that I've read in not just MMA, but just sports in general. We've got veterans like Dave Meltzer and Dave Doyle, Luke Thomas. Danny Segura is a young up-and-comer. Our editor, Brian Tucker, this guy doesn't sleep, literally. So I'm so, I know this may sound kind of cliche, but I feel blessed to be a part of this team. Like, everyone doesn't stop. We're all working 24/7. And if I forgot to, of course, I can't forget Esther Lynn, our photographer, Casey, videographer, the best in the business. It's just a tremendous team. I really, truly love working with all of them. And to your point, I feel like the reason why we're at this point is that we keep evolving. We're not status quo. We keep trying to put out new shows like the MMA Beat, which is our Thursday show, trying to make the MMA Hour better. I mean, the biggest stress on my life every week is trying to book that show and trying to make each week better than the next. Coming out with new features. In fact, today we were talking about UFC 205 in New York, and we're going to be putting out some extra stuff for the fans, some different kind of content from our typical UFC fight week. So that, to your question, that's kind of something to look out for in the next few weeks. But I'm always thinking, I've got some ideas on maybe a new show or two, and I just really want us to try to spread our wings and keep pushing that bar, because I think that, right now, in my opinion, we're the undisputed king. I'm sure others would disagree, and more power to them for that. But I'm very happy with the state of the site right now.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of the points you made. I mean, you guys, we don't have, necessarily an ESPN. FS1 has filled a lot of that void, but there's not a ton of mixed martial arts content outside of live content. They've got a weekly show. But for you guys, if you look at ESPN like I do in the gym in the morning, you're going to see, first take type shows. You're going to see Mike and Mike. You're going to get all these access to the athletes coming on the show, coaches getting interviewed. You guys are starting to do a lot of that, at the MMA Beat, then some of your interviews, your post-fight coverage, Luke's breakdown and technical analysis. You're getting a lot of opinions, but also a lot of content. Then you have Esther doing these new cool fight focuses, kind of storytelling the event through pictures. So I agree. I think it's really cool where now there's 24/7 access to some really cool content that's on there. And so really appreciate that. And I'm excited for it.
Brian?
Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for that. If I can add to that, the way I've always viewed our website from a video standpoint is just exactly as you put it, a 24/7 MMA network, because I've always felt that from a video perspective, MMA fans are underserved. They can't, I'm a big baseball fan, and if I want to get post-game reaction to the Blue Jays game this evening, I could go on MLB Network, ESPN News, FS1. I could go to 1,000 different places. But to get great, MMA coverage, not just UFC, Bellator and One and the World Series of Fighting, or if Mackenzie Dern is fighting, Legacy, it's just hard to find that content. So I feel like we have this amazing opportunity to essentially program our website like it's a 24/7 sports network focusing on MMA. And the best part about this sport is that the fighters, the athletes, and the promoters and managers and coaches are just so damn accessible. I mean, they're all just a phone call away. And that's why there's no excuse, in my opinion, as a journalist, for not advancing stories, for not getting someone on the phone, getting their side of the story, for not doing proper journalism, because you don't have to go through handlers. Everyone's accessible. Everyone's a fantastic interview. Everyone's so damn authentic and just riveting to speak to. I mean, I just can't get enough of the athletes. I mean, to be honest, at the end of the day, like, the fights are the fights, and there's so many of them, and sometimes they get redundant. But the athletes, to me, are intoxicating. Like, I just can't get enough of their stories, speaking to them, trying to learn more about them, their backgrounds. They're just an amazing group of human beings. And to me, that's the best part of covering the sport. So getting that access and being able to share those stories with the world is really the best part of this job, in my opinion.
I can't agree more. I've said it so many times on this show that, you know, no matter who owns the UFC, who runs the UFC, it's going to be successful because the athletes, the stories, the type of people that compete in this sport and how they get there is so unique, so original. I appreciate very much you saying that. And one point I want to add before I let you go is that, you know, for the fighters, for the athletes, there are still some, when they get to the highest level of the sport, that sometimes start to turn off that accessibility. And I advise guys all the time at these fights, that's the last thing they need to do. You want to make yourself available for every interview. Find the time to push your brand, because if you don't, nobody else is going to do it. And Jose Aldo is a great example of where he's stuck in a rut. He's not happy. But historically, you know, he has been one of the tougher guys to get to do any of that stuff. Jose Aldo prefers to just go compete than be left alone for everything and not have to push his fights, not push his brand. And I think that's hurt him in his current situation.
Yeah, it has. And look, I think not maybe going that extra mile and learning how to speak English has hurt him a little bit here in North America. You think about a guy like Junior Dos Santos, who spoke no English when he came to the UFC. Think about him now. Of course, he's not fluent, but he's speaking very well. He's trying, and he's so incredibly likable. He's so pleasant to talk to, always with his big smile. He's like this gentle giant. And to me, I think that's gone a long way in terms of his marketability, the way the fans feel about him. You know, you need to get people emotionally invested in you. And, you know, unfortunately for these fighters, a lot of the business comes out of North America in terms of pay-per-views, and you need to get the North American fan to really want to care about you and want to pay to watch you fight. If you're not speaking English, it's hard to do that. Chael did a great thing for Anderson Silva. If Anderson never had Chael, he never would have made the kind of money that he made. He needed that foil to bring the best out of him. And then later on in his career, you know, he started to speak a little more, but still doesn't say a whole lot. But, you know, it is appreciated. I think the guys who go out of their way to try to learn more, I think of a Rafael dos Anjos who didn't speak. You know, he started to become a lot more interesting once he spoke English. It makes all the difference in the world. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think Aldo is learning more that, you know, the media can help him. And look, you know, I can understand that sometimes they're going to be unhappy with us, and we have to write things that maybe is not in their best interest. But again, I think that we're typically usually, you know, fair. And I could count on one hand, honestly, the amount of people. I mean, I could think of a couple off the top of my head, would rather not say their names, but people who are very accessible who, for whatever reason, stop being accessible. And maybe you can guess them as well. But for the most part, you know, I still can get, from time to time, Conor McGregor on my show, maybe not as often as he used to come on. I could still get DC, Weidman, you know, you, John Jones, any of the big names who maybe weren't big names 5 years ago. They're still very accessible. And I don't know if that's the same in all the other sports, and I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I don't see it being the same in the NFL and other places at all. I agree. We are a much more accessible sport. Well, Ariel, you've given me a ton of time, and I really appreciate it. I know you've got family things to get to, and you've probably got 50 text messages that have come in on different news sources, things you're checking on in the time you've been on this show, man. Thank you so much, as always. Always a pleasure. Love your work. Keep up all the great stuff as you continue to push and progress this sport and really set the standard for journalism, man. Really, thank you very much, Ariel.
And I appreciate that greatly. Anytime you want to have me in, talk about setting the standard. What you've done transitioning out of fighting into broadcasting and not just calling the action, because to me that is impressive. I love the art of interviewing, and what I love most about your show is, as an athlete, sometimes they're so, you know, egotistical. They don't know about the art of interviewing and asking proper questions and follow-ups. You do that very well, and that's a very rare thing for an ex-athlete. So kudos to you, Brian Stan. Keep up the great work.
Well, thank you so much, Ariel. I really appreciate it. There you have it, folks. I'll tell you, man, that man works so hard in this sport. And, you know, he's being flattering there. I still have a lot to work on in terms of my interview skills, but I'm working.